काम है तो बोल दो जाओ।
Hello, a very good evening, everyone. So, today we are going to talk about something very important as a point of a penetration tester or for the organization perspective, because whenever we are trying to do a penetration testing, evidence gathering, it should be in certain structured way, and how this structured approach will be going to carry out. So, for that, there are certain rules, regulations which is there for the organization, for the individual. So that's how as a person you are being categorized, that yes, you are a penetration tester, but for the good cause, and you are the ethical hackers one. So for that there are certain rules and regulations. So let's talk about that. So our today's topic is legal and compliance aspects of VAPT. So not only for the organizations, for different sectors, but also for VAPT, like your vulnerability assessment and penetration roles also, we are having certain guidelines, certain rules and certain frameworks to be followed as a penetration tester, not only by the organization but also by the employee or by the a security expert who are performing this certain kind of simulations, testing and identification, detection of this vulnerability. So let's talk it. So the very first introduction over here, on my screen, if you can see, it's saying that legal and compliance in cybersecurity actually refers to certain frameworks, laws, regulation, standard and guidelines. So what actually this laws, regulation or standards required for in cybersecurity domain to protect your digital asset, your data or your information which is present on the cloud, internet or anywhere openly. So for that only there are certain rules, regulation has been implemented, and this rules, regulation came under the legal compliance. Now what about the framework, how this particular framework in vulnerability assessment and penetration testing will going to help the organization. So when we're talking about the framework, so framework is something which is actually helping the organization to get prevent from certain kind of data breaches, cyber attacks, or it also helps the organization to neglect the risk at some extent, though it's not 100% secure, but yes, you can guarantee a 99% of security of maintaining the data confidential, so that there are high chances that by applying this certain frameworks, the organization is making sure that all the information, even the sensitive information of the consumers, are protected enough. Now let's talk about importance of these compliances, these legal rules and regulations. So over here it says that these roles are ensuring the ethical conduct of security testing activities. So anyone over here in the chat box simply uh, can answer my question that why there is a need of ethical conduct, and why for any organization they have to follow these rules and laws. Anyone can simply answer in the chat box that why there is a need of this ethical conduct, and what is the difference between an ethical and legal way. Hello Rocky, you can answer my question. If you are not aware about this topic, you can simply write that no, you are not aware about this, so I can continue with it. No, ethical means legal, it's not the case, because if ethical means legal, why there is a two different term over here, legality and ethical conduct. If they are same, why I would write two different synonyms for the same word? Okay, let me go with it. So there is a huge misconception between people that ethical and legal both are same. No, that's not the case. Okay, no worries if you are not having idea, I will explain you guys. When we are talking about anything that is legal, so one of the best example you can take for that, your advocates. So what advocates are doing, why there is a need of advocate or the legal group in the organization, because they are the one who are going to take care whether each and everything which has been documented, or any kind of agreement, all that follows certain guidelines, rules or not. Yes, Rocky, you can say ethical could be about permissions, but not actually ethical means that it's asking about the permission. But yes, some extent it is right. So, legal concern talks about your rights, your rules, how particular guidelines, particular organization should follow certain uh, rules provided by the government or by any kind of framework globally. So these are certain ways which has been looked up by the legal teams. So that's what legal is, that each and every stuff you are doing under the government rules and regulation, you are not crossing that limit. Now when we are talking about ethical conduct, so ethical actually talks about requirement, it ensures you, or you can say that it's verified that okay, you are the person and you are having these privileges to do that particular task. So that's what your ethical. Yes, Rahul Kumar, verified we say. So that's what your ethical talks about. So make sure ethical and legal are not the same thing. Though it's quite sound that okay, it's the same stuff, but no, it's not the same thing. Now let's talk about the importance of this compliances and legal aspects in VAPT. So we are having 5 different stuffs for that. The very first is risk mitigation, regulatory compliance, protection of customer trust, ethical consideration, and legal liability reduction. So let's talk about this one by one. So the very first is risk mitigation. So whenever an organization is making sure, suppose there is a finance sector or any payment gateway, so if they are applying PCI DSS framework, and by using certain penetration test or certain vulnerability analysis team, they are making sure that each and everything would be under the smooth ongoing, and the proper designing of the security has been maintained. So the very first thing by deploying all the different departments is that what they are trying to do, they are trying to find out the vulnerabilities. They are trying to make sure there should be no unauthorized access, so that there are high chances if there is no unauthorized or guest entry in the network, the chances of getting the data breaches or your privacy violation will be less. So that's what this compliance or legal aspect is helpful in case of cybersecurity. So this is what your risk mitigation. Now we are having regulatory compliances. So any one of you over here are aware about any compliances which are being commonly used by cybersecurity in any field or in any sector? Yes, Anand Kumar. One is PCI DSS, and we are having a different regulatory compliance. Rocky, it's an cloud service. Oz is your Amazon cloud service. It's not the compliance. Okay, so let's talk about this regulatory compliance. So different industry, you can see that we are having health industry, finance industry, banking sectors, technology industry. So different industry require different ways of protecting the personal data. Sunil, a NIST is not a compliance, it is a framework. Okay, so regulatory compliance is something which is actually talking about your security or your personal data information protection. So for different organization or for different sectors, we are having different compliances, but the most common compliance we are heard about in very common ways is your GDPR, your HIPAA, your PCI DSS. Okay, so we will be talking about this compliances, not now, later on. Third, we are having protection of customer trust. So as we know that everything is present on the internet, it is there publicly available in their databases. So why should a consumer or a customer should trust the organization that their data or their information is safe with that organization. So organizations are trying to implement certain guidelines, or they are trying to follow certain ethical way which make sure that customer is expected to have a communication with them. Yes, Karthikene, you're right. Regulatory compliances is actually talking about certain rules which helps the organization to save the information. But it's not only talking about the digital information. They are also talking about the personal information as well. So quite a time it happens that their data is not on the digital way, they are in manual form or in certain files also, but you have to follow these compliances. And Rocky, compliance is something you can just assume it, like a rule has been set up and you have to follow certain rules. A very good example for that you can assume it, that suppose whenever you are using any applications, at that time there is a common setup that you have to log in, and how you are logging, it should be depend on the application you are using. Suppose if you are using any kind of social websites or social sites like Facebook or Instagram, at that time a simple stuff is that you have to register on that, then only you will be able to create your account, and after that you will be able to use that particular application. So it's a one by one step and you have to follow that step until and unless you will not able to use a particular site. So for the organizations who are having different sectors or domain to play, what they are doing as per their need, they have to apply these compliances, and this compliances is something which helping them as a support, or you can say they are following certain rules to make sure that the personal information of the individual is secured, and they are following all the rules that has been publicly stated. So this is what actually compliances talk about, that they are taking all the security measures and rules to keep your data protect. So in case there is a data breach or any anonymous entries going on, the attacker will not able to fetch that data because of these compliances. So you can say these compliances are something like a boundary which actually helps the organization to prevent their data and the attacker that they cannot have access on that data. Now let's talk about the protection of customer trust. So these compliances or these legal formalities actually helps the organizations and the customer to have a trust, because of if you are using any applications or either any hardwares, for that you are the very first of what you are seeing is you are seeing the feedback, the result, reviews, that this particular organization or this particular device or this application is trustworthy or not. So this compliances actually brings that trust environment about your protection of your data, your information, or your about your privacy, which is with them, with the organization. Next we are having ethical consideration. Now ethical consideration is something which actually talks about your privacy, not about only your but the user privacy, their integrity, because whenever we are logging to any specific websites or any applications or servers we are using which is on the internet, the data is been stored, our personal data like email, phone number, your address, everything has been stored with that particular website. Like if you're shopping with the Amazon, or if you are using any entertainment source, your mail, your phone number, your address, your pin code, your state, everything has been stored with that particular website in that database. So this data which the organizations are fetching from the people or from the user, it should maintain the privacy. The privacy violation should not be there. So how they are storing the user information in that database, it should be followed in an ethical way, that no unauthorized access should be there. So that's the reason we are talking about ethical consideration, that every information of the user should be saved or should be stored in a proper ethical way, so there would be no modification or data breaches on that particular database. Lastly, we are having legal liability reduction. So what this legal liability reduction actually talking over here is that they are talking about certain documentation. Why? Because every time when we are trying to use any software, any application, we are provided with EULA. So what is this EULA? Is nothing but your end user license agreement. So it's actually we are most of the time we want to use that particular application or services, we are blindly clicking on I agree, but it's something which is talking about certain guidelines, certain rules and regulations which has been mentioned about that particular software, how you have to use. And if you are using it beyond that legal concern, you will be responsible for the data you have lost. So this is what the organizations are making sure, that the risk can be minimized by maintaining that certain guidelines, certain rules and regulation in a documented format. So every time when you are going in an organizations or in any colleges, you will see for any specific task you have a document and you have to sign that document. So this actually provides the reduction of the risk that the data is being steal or it has been misused by any of the third person, because you have to follow that rules and regulation that you have signed in a documented format. So this is actually helping an illegal activity to get reduced. Now we are having a different aspects of it, but before that we have to understand actually what is VAPT. So every one of us aware about that VAPT are not one bunch, but it's a two different term, your vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. So vulnerability assessment is something which is actually talking about the vulnerabilities, how you are going to prioritize the risk and address that particular vulnerability based on the severity or CVSS score. But penetration testing is not about the identification or detection of the vulnerability only, but it's more than that, because as a penetration tester, you are providing an actual simulated environment where you are trying to test the real world scenarios, that how an attacker would target this organization and why the attacker would target this organization and what exploit would be generated by using certain vulnerabilities if it is present in that particular system or with that organization. So this is what your penetration testing and vulnerability assessment talks about. Now let's actually dig into the industry term, because different industries are having different regulations and compliance standard. So these are some of the most well-known regulations industries are being applying. So if you can see over here, we are having 4 common regulations compliances, that is your GDPR, Journal Data Protection Regulation, your PCI DSS, Payment Card Industry Data, your HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, your SOX, that is Sarbanes-Oxley Act. So if you can see, GDPR is actually talking about your data protection, your data privacy, and how that organization has to handle your data. Now one of the best thing is that all these compliances are being followed globally. It's not restricted to any nation, any boundary, any state. Every organization, whether it's present in the Asia continent or Pacific continent, they have to follow. There is no boundary. Everyone have to use that particular compliances if they are belonging, or the organization belongs to that particular compliances. Now GDPR actually talks about your data protection, your privacy, your measures, and if you can see, it has been started by the European only. So mostly European citizens or European organizations, you can say, they are following this GDPR policy, and it's one of the best policy or compliances, you can say, for protection of the data. Second, you are having HIPAA. HIPAA actually talks about your health industry. Now when we are talking about the healthcare industry, often people might get confused that okay, it only belongs to the hospital, but that's not the case. Everywhere where your health information is being stored, that organization, that particular store has to follow this HIPAA compliance. So best example for this is your medical shops, your clinics, your hospitals, pharma industries. Why pharma industries? Because pharma industry is actually the part of the healthcare industry. They are making sure that their medicines or their syrups, you can say, or their any kind of medical services are being used by the hospitals, are being used by certain consumers. So for that, they are storing the information of the consumers. So that's the reason that pharma industry should also apply this HIPAA compliance, and this will actually make sure that your health information are in the safe hands. Third, we are having PCI DSS. So PCI DSS are something which actually talked about your credit card transaction, your digital transactions, everywhere, whether your industries, organization, your colleges, or even the normal grocery shoppers who are using this data, like in malls they are using payment digital gateways via Visa, via online or digital transaction, they have to apply this policy, because they are not only transacting a certain amount from your account, but also right now they are having your information, your personal information about your banking details, about your banking sector. So that's the reason this PCI DSS has to be followed by each and every card transactions on the shops, or with the organization, with the third party payment gateways, everywhere. Lastly, we are having Sarbanes-Oxley Act. So this actually talks about your financials report, about your internal control. So it's something which is actually talking about how you are going to make a proper financial report, how you are going to publicly show that certain amount of trade and transaction about the company, so that you can attract more consumers, you can say. So that's what we are having, this one of the most common compliances. Next, we are having certain facilities regarding this regulatory compliances. So what actually helps when the organization applies this regulatory compliance is that it is very easy for the organization to identify vulnerabilities. They can prioritize the vulnerabilities thread, and based on these priorities they can provide an immediate remediation. So it's one of the very useful way, and it also helps the organization to get prevented from any kind of DDoS attack or any kind of data breaches. Third, you can have one of the best way of going a continuous monitoring because of this regulatory compliances. And also you can have a security control validation, where you can validate that all the security which has been applied on certain assets, on certain data, on certain information on the network, on the web pages, is being followed properly. So the auditing is being done properly every monthly basis, quarterly basis, yearly basis. And last and the most important thing is that you are having one of the best incident response plan. An incident response plan is something which every organization must have. Why? Because if any threat or any 0 day vulnerability has been occurred in the organization, they can have a backup or an immediate plan to get prevent from certain attacks. So this will actually help the organization to mitigate or to prevent from getting any kind of attack in early only, in the early phase only. Last, we are having a case study. So this is one of the case study which I have gathered about the HIPAA, about the health sector. So how an organization will be beneficial if they are using any of these compliances. So over here, as you can see, I am talking about the patient's health information. So if any organization who are belonging to the health sector and they are applying this HIPAA policy, one of the best thing is that they are having one of the best security teams which will easily identify the vulnerabilities. If any vulnerability is there and at any certain point the information or the patient data could expose from the organization, so that vulnerability could be found at early phase. And for that vulnerability which has been identified earlier itself, you can provide a remediations and you can rank or you can prioritize that vulnerability based on the severity score, that is your CVSS score, which your NVD is actually providing, and it has been updated every now and then. And lastly, the most important is that you are having security control validation. That means you are checking and you are having a closer look that this HIPAA compliances are being effective for your organization and all the regulatory standards has been followed at every places or not. So this is where your security control validation helps. And last, you are having quality evidence of due diligence. So if you are finding any kind of vulnerability, you are providing certain mitigations, remediations on that, and you are having a proper security validation check every quarterly basis, weekly basis, or you can say every yearly basis. This will actually helps you to address those vulnerability in the early phase, and there would be chances that no 0 day attack or no 0 day vulnerability would be present at your organization, and you can make sure that your organization is much more secure. So this is where your HIPAA will actually help the organization or to the any health organization if they are applying this HIPAA. So that's what your actual topic, that is your ethical hacking concepts regarding the VAPT compliances. So if you are having any questions regarding this, you can ask me. Guys, attendance link has been shared with you. Kindly mark your attendance.